Welcome. We are live and having an interview, and my name is Stephanie Gunning, and I'm a book coach and writer and editor, and we're here with Courtney Marchesani. Did I say that correctly?
Close. It's Marchesani. It's a hard CH. Yeah, it's an Italian. Yeah, like a Chianti.
Marchesani.
Right.
And we're talking today about The Fifth Chamber, which is not a book that I edited, but it is a wonderful novel, and you wrote it with a pseudonym.
Yes, well, I did, and I have to say, Stephanie, that even though you didn't edit it, I didn't use an editor, so I have to give you a tribute because you got me to the place as a writer where I could write actually without going through an intensive editing consult.
Well, you are a beautiful writer, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you about this book is because I know that you have been working for the last few years with spiritual energy, and you are we share a passion for plant medicine and for awareness and consciousness. And I'm interested because this book is subtitled The Art of Love Ecstasy. And so let me first ask you to tell us about it. Where did the idea for this book come from?
Well, I just want to say with gratitude, thank you for acknowledging my spiritual journey and my energetic journey and my consciousness, changing consciousness, because that's a huge part of why this book came about. I had just finished the book that we worked on together, my first book, which was a project that started in 2003, really, which was the beginning of, I would say, my healing journey. Mm-hmm. And I had long wanted to finish that book, but did not feel like I had the courage as a writer to bring it about in an honorable way that I felt really represented the story. So once that book was done and we had finished it, I was pretty excited about it. And I got invited to come to Costa Rica and talk about the writing process, to be joined with other artists who were, quite, expert in their field. One of them was Gary Swanson. He's a writer, but he's also an actor. So he does a lot of screenwriting and developing of story and drama through the screen. Another artist that was there was Dallas Mayer. He's in New York as well. He goes by Jack Ketchum. And so he was an award-winning horror writer, which horror really isn't.
I feel like I know that name, and I don't.
You probably do.
I don't read about horror,
Yeah, he's been around for a really long time. And when I was young, I really liked those kind of stories. I know and have knowing Jack Ketchum now, I know a lot more about horror and what it represents in his philosophy, which is a whole different track. But anyway, I was surrounded by these people and a music industry contact. So there are all these artists there, and I was talking with them, and the idea for this book actually came from Jack Ketchum. He and I were sitting together, and we were talking about his long history of writing for like Hustler magazine and being in New York and being in the S&M scene. And I was like, wow, tell me more,
That sounds like horror to me.
Right, and his name is Dallas, so I call him Dallas, but he writes under a pseudonym. So the pseudonym of this book is was also like honoring him in a way as a mentor and someone who's been successful with writing. And although I'm not as near or would never claim to be as good of a writer as he is, I just wanted to kind of give him that, right under a pseudonym because it's cool. And I didn't feel confident coming out writing as sexual, as salacious as a story as I was going to. But he was giving me all this like really great ideas, and he turned to me and he said, it would be a really good idea? And I said, what? And he said, to write a dark noir erotic thriller.
Right.
And so that went into my consciousness, and I went, bing, and I came home from Costa Rica.
Yeah,
like vibrating, like this is so exciting. And the thing that really put it into me was the seed that he said, have you ever read the classic story? I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it was a story.
Right?
It was written in French, and they thought it was a woman who wrote it.
Oh.
It was an S&M, classic S&M book.
No, I don't know what that is. Yeah. I haven't read.
It was kind of around the Marquis de Sade's era. Anyway, I'll get that for you. But anyway, I ordered it. I got home, I read it. I did all my research, and the story started to develop in that way. So, Dallas just kind of put it in my mind. And then
Courtney, interestingly, there is so much interest in the erotic novel, the 50 Shades of Grey, and then the sequel, and then the sequel, and then the sequel. And whether you like them or you don't like them, clearly there's an appetite. And, so when you were tapping into this and this altered persona, this Camille in you.
Right. My alter ego. Absolutely. I'll admit that.
Were you finding a core that this already existed in? Like, is this just an aspect of your sexuality? Where does art come from like this?
Right. Well, I have to say that, great question, by the way, because after I came home from that and had that idea, I didn't want to produce something like those titles. It's not that I don't like them, but I felt like there was a lot of redundancy in the writing that didn't give you more, the deeper excitement of what's really going on in the character. So I did use my own vessel. Yeah. I used my own vessel as like the creative spark to say, where would I want to go with this story? And Dallas had recommended, this is what, audiences might really need, and, kind of something that's needed in the market right now. And I thought, well, I don't want to go too dark, but I want to go dark enough because we all have dark and light in our own experience.
Yes.
So when I started to conceive of the story in Camille, the reason why I wanted to write it in a way that was kind of a spiritual enlightenment, and that's what the book represents, a path to spiritual enlightenment and health and discovery of the self. So I really wanted to tap into self-cultivation with sexual energy because I had done that process myself. The beginning of this story is drawn completely from my life. I withdrew from a horrible relationship, which I actually wrote about with you. I mean, we did it together in my first book, and that was the memoir. And I wanted to continue that and say, well, look what can happen in your life when you withdraw from these relationships that are really unhealthy and put that energy into yourself. So I wanted the story to be deep, in a much deeper way than I think I've seen any of these other marketable or widely successful stories tell it.
This is what I love about women's writing. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yes, when we learn to express ourselves and then give it back to ourselves, right? We're like, there's like a complete cycle of creation and nourishment, right? It comes into us, it comes out of us, right? So,
oh, absolutely.
Both your creative process as a writer, but then also what your character's undergoing too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am 100% in alignment with what you just said. I went from a very, I would think, fragile state as a writer where I was just using the page as mainly like bleeding on the page, like just dumping out this horrible experience that I felt was 100% traumatic to every part of my being. Mm-hmm. And it took me a long time to finish the first book because I really feel like the creativity of writing it healed me, not only as in my writing process to feel confidence, but as a woman. And so I started to honor that. And as I did, I felt energy coming back to me, like what you're talking about, that cycle of, just restoring, reevaluating, and the rejuvenative process of creativity.
You took something from your life as a kernel, as a seed, mm-hmm. but then that seed lived a different life than you.
Absolutely. And I do not, like, I haven't done all the experiences that Camille has, but I would say my archetypal, self wanted to explore those concepts with those seeds.
Right.
And so I wrote the story that I felt like women are maybe really thirsting for on a deeper level, but they don't know. So the writing is not your traditional style. I mean, there are pieces of stream of consciousness in it, and the narrative fits in a traditional novel, but it's, when I started to look kind of like for opinions of what it was, it's like literary erotica, which is very rare, but kind of embodies what I was trying to do. So it all happened fluidly and very quickly. I finished the book in a year.
Yes.
And then I finished the screenplay just this fall. So there's been a lot of development on it.
Yeah, wonderful. Now tell me a little bit about what in the story enables the character to awaken?
She withdraws from sex, and she withdraws from any form of self-pleasure. Mm-hmm. So it's a withdrawing of the senses, of her sexual senses, and she does that organically. She's not following any kind of method, no guru, none of that. It's a listening that she has because she's dissatisfied with all of her string of failed relationships. Mm-hmm. And the character is about 27 years old, so she's had quite a few experiences. She lives in San Francisco, so her life is very artistic and very varied, and she's in the scene, but she's a professional. She's a marketing executive. Mm-hmm. So there is a certain amount of restraint that she puts on herself, kind of as a way of controlling desire to get to somewhere else. And the thing that's underneath it is that she wants to find love, but she's putting I guess more of an experimental twist on it because she wants something deeper in her love life rather than what she's been getting, which is failure and misery.
So without giving anything away, mm-hmm. Where does the ecstasy come from in this book?
Well, interestingly enough, a fortuitous event happens that's beyond her control at the end of the year. This isn't a spoiler because it's part of the back of the book and the book jacket, but she receives this ancient book, and it's kind of like I drew the inspiration from those old chain letters that you used to get. Like I lived in the country, so you'd get a chain letter in your mailbox, yeah. Which was so exciting that you'd be like, oh wow, well if I circle around 3 times and go to bed and snap my fingers, something exciting is going to happen, and then you needed to pass it on. Yeah. So I worked that in as a device for her to kind of receive a cosmic sign that you're on the right path. So she uses the book, which is entitled Love and Ecstasy, Volume 1, and there are these cones of wisdom within that book that she follows in her regular life. And she makes huge decisions about it, and she is trying to reach for who she is and develop who she is and her identity, which is so important. And that's a huge part of the journey and of the tale of the story is who is she really? What is she looking for?
Right. So in the search for love, if you don't know who you are,
it gets confusing. Right. And I don't go into detail about like the confusion of the senses. I let that happen. Like naturally through character development and through the dialogue.
Well, it's wonderful, and congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you took the time to write it. So that is the 5th chamber, The Art of Love and Ecstasy, and this is on Amazon and all the great online stores. So let's just take a minute and talk about some of your other work too, because I know that you have a coaching practice, which includes, you're sort of like a body, mind, spirit person. You have delved deeply and apprenticed yourself with healers who work with a traditional herbal medicine. You're very involved now with essential oils. I know you've studied a bunch of other stuff, modalities, for lack of a better word, the modalities, right? So,
if you're in the trade, you call that integrative, integrative mind-body medicine.
Right. And so your coaching practice is fairly recently inaugurated, correct?
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
And the people that you work with, or that you aspire to work with, are what you call highly sensitive, or what I call highly sensitive also. What does that mean? How would a person recognize themselves as highly sensitive?
Well, I think through the process for me of individuation and learning through my healing crisis and my long interest in psychology and going in that direction, and working in mental health, really, I think was kind of the split for me as a healer. Being in chronic mental illness and that field of working with people individually, it influenced me. It influenced my own health, and I didn't understand that at the time. I wasn't aware of it consciously. But my body broke down. It was pretty dramatic. I was at a mental health conference and the right side of my body went paralyzed.
Oh my goodness, was that Bell's palsy or what do they call that?
No, it wasn't.
Just
I had great insurance at the time. So the good thing was, in many ways, after I was able to kind of move and function, I went home and I wasn't able to speak still. I could, drive my car and get on the highway of I-5, which was scary. I never should have done that. But I wasn't aware of what happened. And I kind of felt like, well, if I can walk and I can move, I can drive a car, which I was impaired. But by the time I got home to Seattle, to my suburban neighborhood, I couldn't speak. So I was trying to talk to my husband and it was coming out like this, blah, 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 blah. And he was alarmed, rightfully so. And so I just couldn't do anything else really but sit at the kitchen table. And he waited and I had a drink of water. And eventually I said, I think I might have had a stroke. So we went to the hospital right away. I got every kind of diagnostic done, but modern science was like, we don't know. And clearly something was wrong because residually I had drooping and there was some tingling, which is called paresthesia, I learned. But they didn't have an answer for me. So I went on the holistic track to try to heal myself and have a good quality of life. And I recovered, thank God. But it opened me up to this whole different world where it's not always what we think it is. And that's what my doctor essentially said. I don't know what's wrong with you. And sometimes we as doctors have to admit that we don't know and just go on living. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. I was like, what the hell? I got to try to learn and discover more. And so I went on a deep dive and did everything that was available. And so that brings me up to today, which is now 12 years later after that recovery.
So you yourself are highly sensitive.
And that's what I uncovered.
And you were, so it's incredible because I think if I'm hearing you correctly, and I'm glad you're better.
Me too.
Right? That the people around you are affecting you, and you're almost like a sponge absorbing it. And at some point your sponge was too full and you needed to be wrung out.
Well, right. And I didn't realize there's so many different dynamics of this and the way modern medicine looks at it versus the East. And there are so many different ways to kind of dissect what happened. But in my opinion, after looking at the way the progression of it happened, it was definitely sensitivity related. Mm-hmm. And in learning and taking this time to heal and also to kind of uncover the subtleties of sensitivity and what that really means, I feel like I'm now able to step out and teach. Right. Because I've done a number of work with body workers, with energetic workers, with spiritual masters and teachers, and they all came at a time when I really needed to learn that piece of the medicine for myself. So I really want to help other sensitive people so they understand there's nothing wrong with them. And it's not a disease, and it's not anything wrong with the organic chemistry of the brain. It's none of that. It's the way the brain and the body process stimuli in the environment. And everybody's different. So you have a lot of talk nowadays about empathic people. And so, empathic people are kind of what you're talking about. They absorb everything into them. And sensitive people are not necessarily categorized in that way, but it's kind of a continuum. And once you start to understand the continuum or the spectrum of sensitivity, you can understand like where you fall on it. So I use sensory therapies as a way to heal the mind, body, spirit. Right. And when you explain it that way and break it down that way, people understand it. But if you just went to my website and looked at it, you might go, this doesn't make any sense to me. But if you
like your website. I think
good.
The people that I know through my work as an editor are sensitive people. Writers are very feeling people. There also was a period of time when I was an actor, and so I was also around a different kinds of sensitivity. Right. That kind of emotional nuance that people in these. So you would imagine maybe that a writer would be all living up here, and some are, and sometimes I'm living up there, right? But then there's also a lot of writers who just live in their heart, because they may be very, like, they have to cultivate observation so they can describe it. Right. But they're processing through their senses because they're writing visually. They're writing, they're auditory, you know, so there's lots of different kinds of sensitivity you can have as a creative person. The emotional sensitivity that makes somebody prone to trauma, right? That is, one person can go through a car wreck and walk away and have not a scratch on them, psychically or physically. And another person, they get a hangnail and it's a total meltdown. You know,
and those other people are going, what? I didn't feel a thing. What are you barking about? Yeah, I mean, it's,
you know,
it's
you
so
need
true.
to know, you know, right? You need to have that self-awareness, right?
You absolutely do. And that's part of the healing journey, I think. And you know, one of the things I kind of push back against nowadays is this thing that oftentimes, at least in the last 10 years, you'd hear, you can't say heal. You can't say heal this condition. You can't say heal that condition. Well, I'm not afraid to say the word heal because I think it's reparative, restorative. Revivification is a form of healing. And so people who get maxed out, we're all similar in one way. We have a threshold, regardless of how information is coming in. Once that threshold is reached, we're done.
Right.
We're done. And we're going to experience symptoms in whatever way that means for us without going into any kind of label or anything else. So once that threshold is reached and you know it, we need to withdraw. And so in yoga and in Ayurveda, there is a whole limb, the fifth limb, which is to take away, you know, the senses, is a form of inner cultivation.
Yeah.
To be aware of those sensitivities and to walk through the world is a sense of being in control of them, because our senses have the power to do, you know, harm, considerable harm. And so I think waking up to that and teaching it as a teacher has been very profound for me, just individually and also helping other people. And
when you're working as a coach, are you working with people on many different levels of who they are?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things that I really uncovered just in terms of psych, while also psychospiritual, is Jung and his work. I mean, I knew about it in my undergraduate, but there's so much depth there. And in terms of diagnostics and understanding what's happening with people, there's a nice crossover. So narrative therapy is very useful. And how we define ourselves and our own experience, which is writing, creativity. It's a very healing. So it crosses over in through the psyche, and how, you know, diagnostics through Jungian work can really help you understand where someone is.
Yes.
And what they're addressing in the light and the darkness of their own experience, and how they identify that through a character.
Yeah. And
the structure of that. And then so how you help them to walk through that is very powerful. So that's one of the things that I learned that I honor in the work, because it's based in Jung, but it's also very much part of wisdom traditions of just acknowledging story and storytelling in someone's life, and how powerful that is as a creative force for healing.
Yes. And we do culturally share archetypes, you know, and some of them are changing. I have a couple of clients as an editor who are depth psychologists, and what, you know, either with a master's or a doctorate, working with different demographic populations, you know, whether gay and lesbian or older women or whatever it is, right? And we're in an era when everything is being reformed. So there definitely are the old archetypes, you know, that's definitely, it's a pattern, right?
Right.
They're existing patterns. And then sometimes when you go looking, you find a pattern you prefer. And sometimes you find, you know what, something is going on culturally here that's never happened in the whole history of the human race. And a new pattern is yet to emerge. It's kind of destabilizing psychologically, but to me, it's very exciting, because it means that if you're brave enough to take a look, you can help design the paradigm. You know, you can.
I know. I'm with you.
That power to create is very exciting, you know. And I love that what you said about the retreat and the self-cultivation. It goes right back to your novel.
I know, and it's all like it all kind of builds together because it's a process. I mean, it's not disparate pieces that are just hanging out there. You know, it's part of that process that I brought in. And somebody read it and they said, wow, Courtney, this is going to be the way people are, you know, from like 300 years from now. You know, it might be kind of racy right now, and they might consider it, you know, really far out. You know, but I think it's part of the wisdom of our bodies.
I wonder if, like in ancient Egypt, let's say, in the Isis temple, if the women were operating this way, you know. I have a feeling that some deep feminine mysteries are coming back.
Yes, and I feel like I maybe was a conduit for one of those stories. And I didn't put any names, judgments, or labels on it, but I left it open to where this might come from. I do reference Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh and the tablets and the clay tablets are in there as a big part of the teachings. So it's funny that you should mention that culture.
Well, you know, what is old is new, right? I mean,
right, and it honors it too. It honors that story, but it perceives it, I think, in a different light, but definitely in a feminine perspective.
Right, right. Cool.
Thank you so much for having me and allowing this opportunity to talk about the book. I hope people read it and love it and give feedback.
Well, I'm halfway through it and loving it. And I think that people should go and read it and think about it. And anybody who is working through a transition in their life who feels that they are sensitive should definitely take a look at your website. Say the name of your, it's Inspired Potentials.
It's inspiredpotentials.com.
And Courtney Marchesani.
Right. I'm trying to make it easier. Like, I'm trying to find a way to make it easier for people to, you know, get the last name or search it. But I think I'm just going to let it be for right now. I was thinking CC Marches might be a way to kind of
leave it. Don't worry about it.
It's less ethnic, that's for sure.
They'll find you because they'll resonate with what you offer, you know. Right. And, you know, I'm happy to say this. You know, I always find you to be very intelligent, very compassionate, non-judgmental, open, inquisitive, creative. So I think I'm certain that your coaching clients will benefit from all that.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. You gave me the courage and lent me, I think, some power also, some feminine power to write, to be a writer. You gave me the confidence for sure. I'm so glad I found you.
If I can do that for you, I can do it for myself. You know, we're all in this together, right?
Amen. Amen, sister.
All right, I'm going to let that be the last word. So again, go look at Inspired Potentials. And with S on the end. And,
thank you.
And thanks a lot. I'm going to pause this, or stop it rather.